watching Now with Bill Moyers, with contributions from NPR News. Tonight on Now, is war against Iraq a threat to American prosperity?
You have all kinds of money taken out of productive private savings and investment to build bombs and missiles that it's economically dangerous.
Lew Rockwell on Bush, Iraq, and the economy tonight on Now. Funding for Now has been provided by our sole corporate funder. For over 50 years, we've put retirement and pension products to work for those in the public service. Now we're doing the same for the rest of America. Mutual of America, for all of America, the spirit of America. And by the Kohlberg Foundation, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Nathan Cummings Foundation, and by contributions to your PBS stations from viewers like you. Thank you. From our studios in New York, Bill Moyers.
Welcome to Now. If you're thinking about money, bills, the job, and your pension, and not just the war, you belong to the largest party in America, the party of angst. The economy's sputtering. The Dow is down. Oil prices and health costs are soaring, and over 8 million people are unemployed. The other day, the Wall Street Journal ran a page-one story on a worker who had sent out over 700 resumes without landing a job. What's clear is that all the talk about tax breaks stimulating the economy is only stimulating fear about deficits. Even the White House now estimates the budget deficit will hit a record $304 billion this year, and that's without figuring in a war whose cost the government refuses to reveal. With me now to talk about all this is Lew Rockwell. Mr. Rockwell is a libertarian, free market conservative, and president of the Ludwig von Mises Institute. That's the organization he founded to advocate and promote the philosophy that the solution to our fiscal and social woes begins with smaller government. Mr. Rockwell has been a congressional aide, a book editor, a magazine editor, and is now the editor of his own website. Welcome to Now.
Bill, great to be with you.
Business pundits and the government have been saying for 20 months that this is not really a recession. It's just a kind of a stumbling a bit. The economy is stumbling a bit. Is it a recession?
You know, I remember back when Alfred Kahn, very funny economist who worked for Jimmy Carter, and he referred to a depression and was taken to the woodshed by Carter over this. And when he talked to the reporters afterwards, he said, I'm never going to say that word again. I'm only going to say the word banana, but, you know, we're in a banana.
So are we in a banana?
Sure, we're in a banana.
We're in a bunch of bananas.
We're in a very serious recession.
And it's
what
true
do
they
they
call
it?
People?
Well, it means that the economy is shrinking. If we look at the government's own statistics, and we have to subtract the increase in government spending, which is bad for the economy, not good, we're getting poorer as an economy. That's what a recession means. For us regular people, it means we're getting poorer, and we're going to continue to get poorer. And I think we can all feel it, even aside from the statistics. We all feel the fear for retirements and our savings. We're worried about our jobs. We see businesses closing. We're getting poorer. And if the Bush administration set out to do everything possible to make the recession longer and deeper and maybe turn it into a depression, they'd be doing exactly what they're doing now.
What's keeping you awake at night?
Well, first of all, you mentioned the $304 billion deficit figure, but that's actually a fib, because what we always need to pay attention to is how much the national debt is going up by, which is always much more significant than the official deficit, because the government spends money so-called off budget, and it doesn't count in the official budget deficit. So if we look at the actual deficit that's going on right now, it's over $400 billion. That is the difference between income and outgo for the federal government. And again, that's without the war, and the economy is heading downhill. So I think it's very, very worrisome. Who knows what the deficit could actually be in the next fiscal year? 600 billion, 700 billion?
And one of my associates just handed me this story from the New York Times. The budget President Bush submitted last month should have come with the warning, they're back. Deficits are reemerging as a major problem. Goldman Sachs recently raised its estimate of the federal budget deficit to $375 billion. You're saying it could be more than that?
Oh, sure. It could be. It's already a lot more than that. And these figures are all available on the treasuries, although they don't have a nice chart to make it easy on you. But these figures are all available. It's already more than $400 billion, the actual deficit. I mean, just to take the example of the foreign aid that Bush has promised to Turkey if they come along with him on the war, that money would come out of the Exchange Stabilization Fund as a loan. But that would not count in the official budget deficit, even though it's a debt of the federal government. So it's, again, the increase in the national debt, and it's very, very worrisome.
What does this mean to ordinary people? I mean, the words like deficits and recession come and go among economists and newspaper headline writers, but what does it mean to ordinary working people?
Well, it means trouble, because sometimes Republicans and Democrats, for that matter, like to pretend that there's some way to fund the government other than the two ways of taxation and inflation. Those are the only two ways they can postpone it through borrowing. But all those have negative economic effects. And when we have deficits this size, first of all, it means that everybody's worried that these are going to be monetized, i.e. that the Federal Reserve will in effect print money to pay them. And that has all kinds of bad effects besides rising prices. It's what brings on the business cycle, for example. It's what the Fed did in the 1990s, or the reason that we now are in the longest, deepest recession since the Cold War. You worked in Washington 4 years as a congressional aide. Do you think everyone in Washington is in denial over the shipwreck that's coming on this issue of deficits? Or is there a conspiracy to look the other way when the emperor passes with no clothes on? Well, there's both of them, but I also think the fact that, these are not necessarily bad for the government. It's bad for the people. But I think the government in these things has a very different interest, usually, in fact, the opposite of what the people's interest is. So however they can expand government spending, and they switch between the various methods of borrowing, taxing, and inflating, depending on the political climate, they are benefited, they and the interest groups that who receive the dough. Is this, however, what free market libertarian conservatives have been wanting, to put the government so much in debt that it can't possibly raise more money to support more government spending? I mean, the conservative activist Grover Norquist was here, where you're sitting not long ago, and he says he wants to shrink the government until it can be drowned in the bathtub, and the best way to do that is just to strangle the source of money. Well, I think this is a Republican fib, as great a guy as Grover Norquist is. Because, of course, the government keeps growing. President Bush has expanded the federal budget by 30%. I mean, this is the biggest spending administration since Mr. Johnson's. And it may be... you wrote somewhere that Lyndon Johnson and George W. Bush have a lot in common. They like to spend money. Yeah, they do. If we look at the facts and not the rhetoric, Republicans expand the government much more than Democrats do. If you look at the Reagan administration, the Nixon administration, both Bush administrations are all big government operations. The smallest government guy in recent times, Jimmy Carter. Even Clinton was a smaller government guy than George Bush. You advocate low taxes. Do you support Bush's tax cuts? Well, I'm all for tax cuts. I think taxes, a shorthand for taxes is wealth destruction. So certainly the fewer taxes we have, the better. On the other hand, the government spending has to be paid for somehow. So if he's expanding the government at the rate that he is, at a huge rate, to talk about tax cuts, it seems to me, is irresponsible. Probably the most destructive way to fund the federal government is through inflation, through the Federal Reserve. So actually, I hate to say taxes are better than that, but yes, taxes are less economically destructive than inflation. So for him to be, I think it's highly irresponsible. I think it's just a trick to fool people. After all, his previous so-called tax cuts have yet to come into effect. They don't even come into effect until next year, and my prediction is they won't come into effect. There'll be some sort of war emergency, and then we'll be able to bring them into effect. There is some talk in Washington that the huge expenditures on a war against Iraq would actually boost the economy by circulating all that spending on defense. What about that? Well, I know that's the claim. The French economist in the 19th century, Frederick Bastiat, talked about the broken window fallacy. A bad boy tosses a rock through a baker's window, and everybody's very sad for the poor baker, and then a guy maybe an economist in the crowd says, oh, don't worry, this is going to be great. It's going to be money for the glazier. Then he'll buy a new suit, and everything, will multiply, and we'll be all better off. But that, first of all, leaving aside property rights and morality questions, it ignores what that money would have been spent on otherwise. So to take vast sums out of the private productive economy and spend them on things that are anti-productive, weapons of mass destruction and so forth, that have no economic purpose, far from being a help, is a disaster. You can think of the U.S. military as that little boy with a rock. But didn't World